Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Jessica, this is Pin Drop Shop, and today I'm going to show you how to make quilt binding. Okay, so to make our quilt binding, first we need to cut strips. So I'm using this Ray Ritchie Dear Stella flannel, and we're going to cut some strips on the bias. So that means on the diagonal of the fabric. So your fabric has threads that go this way and threads that go this way, so your warp and your weft, and then or I guess your warp would be this way. And then if you were to cut something that went with the selvage, which I just cut off, that would be the grain line. Selvage would be down here, but I just cut it off. So anything going this way is the grain line. Anything that would be going this way is the cross grain. And then we're gonna go on the bias, which is the diagonal. Okay, so we want it to be perfectly diagonal, so at a 45-degree angle. So if we look at our cutting mat here, at all the squares, what we're going to want is for the roller, edge of my roller here, to be going through all the corners of the squares. So like, I'm gonna just move it until I can see that that's what it's doing. So like if it was going through that, then we want it to go through that, and through that, and through that. So it's cutting each, the edge of the roller is like slicing each square on the mat in half perfectly diagonally. So a lot of rollers, or a lot of mats will have lines. I think mine has it up here, but I want to do it right here, so we don't really need it. We're just going to make sure of that. So let's get my fabric over here, and I'm using 1/3 of a yard because I have a fairly small quilt. It's only 43 by 46 inches. And 1/3 will be plenty to make that amount of binding. So basically, if you need to calculate how much you need, just think of it like, well, I need 43 2 times, and I need 46 2 times, and then add that up, and that's how many inches you need. And then you could even like visualize it on a piece like this. I would start with, like, it probably won't take more than a half unless you have a really big quilt. But I've done quilts that are 45 by 70 and they usually take 1/3, so I know this will be plenty for this small quilt. Okay, so let's start and just make a cut somewhere. So we just want to do, like I said, we want the roller to be slicing through. Let's start at the edge so we can see and make sure that we're how we need to be. So up here, if we're going through that corner and we're going through that corner, we can even lift here just to be sure that that's what we would be. We'd be going through these corners. Okay, and that's good. So just kind of do that and then make sure that it's still going through the corners there, so that we know we have a good 45-degree angle. And if you have a nice big long roller, make sure that all the way over to both edges it is still doing that, and then you'll know that you're good. And then you want your fabric to be on a line. That's good enough. Okay, so let's go ahead and cut. So make a cut here. Okay, we can just get rid of this piece. Okay, so now you get to decide how wide of strips you want to make for this. So you can do 2-inch strips, you can do 2.5-inch strips, you can go somewhere between. I think I'm going to do 2.5-inch strips today. Okay, so I have lined up right here because that would be 2.5 inches away from this edge. So here's the edge, so if you come into here, that's 1 inch. Here's 2 inches, and then there's a 1/2 inch. That would be 3, so we want to go 2.5. So along the edge that I've already cut, I'm just lining up that 2.5-inch marking, and then having the cutting edge to the right, because I'm right-handed. If you were left-handed, you could do all this cutting starting over here and go this way, so you have your cutting edge over here. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut. Alright, so here's our first little strip, and it's small, and maybe you don't want these small pieces and you want to start more in the middle, but I don't mind a couple small pieces. Maybe I won't use them, maybe I'll just use the bigger ones towards the center. Okay, so again, I just went 1, 2.5, lined that up at the raw edge that I've just cut, and I'm going to cut along here. Okay, so I'm just going to keep cutting strips like this. Okay, so 1, 2 and a half, all lined up. Okay, so once you have done a bunch of these, if you want to make sure you're not going too far, you can start kind of measuring them and adding them up. But you just need to cut enough strips that you have the number of inches that you need, which mine's going to be close to 200 inches because I had 43 plus 43 plus 46 plus 46 plus a little extra. So I can measure all these as though they're straight, even, you know, just to make sure there's enough. So I'm going to continue cutting, and then I'm going to show you how to sew these together. Basically, how we want to sew them together is like this, how this one actually just is accidentally. So we want it to be like that, so we have a diagonal seam, just because when this gets folded, it's going to be very bulky if you do a normal straight up and down seam like you might feel like doing if you didn't know. So like if you just did it like that and you sewed it together, like, and that was your seam, and then you went like this to fold it in half to make the binding, you have this bump, and it's just not nice, and it just is obvious. So the seam, we want it to be diagonal. So these two pieces are already just cut like that, but all of them will not be. So like this one, I could go ahead and just put them right sides together and then just sew. See how when I put them right sides together, there's a little triangle seam allowance on either side that will be there. So right where you sew is going to be in that little corner there, where that meets that. You would sew from that down to the other one over here, in there. And you can cut those off if you want, and then when you open it up, you'll have that nice diagonal seam, but it'll be less bulky. So it won't work out like this every time where you get to just match up these nice diagonal cuts. So for most of them, let's just cut these off just to get those out of our mind. Pretend that they're not cut all nice. Okay, so we just have some strips that don't have that nice thing. Okay, so then what you do is you take them and you put them right sides together, but then you rotate one 90 degrees like that. And then what you do is you sew from this corner. Let me straighten that up. You sew from here to here. So then when you open it up, you have that. Makes sense? So you're taking your two strips, no matter how the edges are, and you're placing one on top of the other, right sides together, but at a perpendicular, like that. And then when you peek under here, you'll know where that corner is. And you can even take a ruler and draw a line. You could pin it if you feel like you need to, and then draw, you know, so you have something to follow. But you're just gonna sew from this corner down, peek under, find that other corner, and you're gonna sew to that corner. Then you can cut off that. You'll have a big triangle seam allowance here you can cut off. And when you open it up and press it, you'll have that diagonal seam. So I'll go ahead and draw a line. I'll use my ruler here. So I have the corner, and then I'm going to look for the corner. I'm going to peek under here. There it is. Line up my edge right with that corner. I know you can't see it, but it's in there and I'm lined up on it. Okay, so corner to corner. And we're just going to draw a line like that. And that's what we're going to sew along. And then I'll pin it and take it over to the sewing machine. Okay, so now I'm going to sew this right along the line I just drew. I'm not going to start at the very corner. I'm going to start in just a bit so I can back up to the beginning, sew all the way down here, and then back stitch, just to make sure it doesn't come undone as I'm working with it. Okay, so press the foot down, back stitching, and sewing forward, right along that line. And you probably shouldn't use pen. I just did so you could see it. You should use pencil or chalk or an erasable pen, something like that. It won't get all over the place eventually. Okay, so I got to the end and then I backstitched about 3, cut the thread, and let's go back up to the cutting mat. So you can see where we have sewn here, and when we open it up we have that nice diagonal. So I'm just gonna put it all back down with the perpendicular, and I'm just gonna cut off this seam allowance. So it doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna line it up with the 1/4 inch and cut it off. Looks great. So then we'll take it to the iron and we'll press the seam allowance to one side, and you'll do this for the whole strip. Okay, so once you've sewn all your pieces together and you've cut off any seam allowances you didn't need, we're going to come over to the ironing board and we're going to press all the seams to one side. So just pick a side and press them down. They don't have to be the same or anything. Just press them down. Go all the way through the entire strip and do that. And then come back and just fold it in half like this. So wrong sides together, lengthwise. Just fold the entire strip in half and press it, aligning your 2 edges here. You could also do these 2 steps in the same go, like go all the way through the strip, pressing the seam allowances down and pressing it in half like this. And that's it. After you do that, you will have your own beautiful quilt binding. So I'll do a separate video probably on how to attach this to the quilt, but just to give you a quick explanation, if this white cloth was our quilt, if this was the back of our quilt, you would take this binding and align it with the raw edge up at the top like this, and then you would stitch it on, and then you would do a mitered corner at the corners, which I'll show you in another video probably, and you'd go all the way around, and then there's a way to connect them at the joining point. But you would stitch it, and then this is the back of the quilt, and then you would flip this binding like forward onto the front of the quilt. So then the front of the quilt would look like that, back would look like that, and then you can either machine stitch it down or you can hand stitch it down with an invisible stitch. So that's how you make quilt binding. I hope this helped you. I hope you like this video and consider subscribing if you like more things like this.